Okay, welcome back, everyone. This is the video podcast that we're calling, what are we calling this? Minding
Minding
Emotions.
emotions.
Yes, and it's in anticipation of the book that Rami and I have coming out with Harvard University Press next year. I think it'll probably be out early next year, 2019. Still getting the final word on what the actual title will be, but we like
Hmm.
Minding Emotions. We'll see how that goes. My name is Stephen Asma, and I'm a professor of philosophy at Columbia College Chicago, a member of the research group in Mind, Science, and Culture, and
My name is Rami Gabriel. I'm associate professor of psychology at Columbia College Chicago, and also a fellow at the Research Center Research Group for Mind, Science, and Culture. And I'll just say a few words. We're going to talk today about the relationship between emotions and culture. And this is kind of a continuation of last time when we uh, investigated the question of are emotions social constructs? And we came down really on the side that in general they're probably not. But we wanted to take a little more of a positive approach and say, well, what elements of this sort of nexus of culture and emotion and cognition um, uh, is constructed, and how might it be constructed?
good. And so we've been reading this work that I think is well known to people who are interested in cultural evolution, and it's Richardson and Boyd is sort of the team that's out of California, and I think their protege was Joe Henrich, who now is, I think, at Harvard. Is that right? I think Henrich moved over to Harvard. But I sort of think of them as the California school of of cultural evolution. And Richardson and Boyd had a very influential book, a very good book, come out called "Not in
Mhm.
Our Genes," right?
Right.
And so we've been looking at a paper of theirs from a little earlier than that, and thinking a lot about cultural evolution and trying to understand it without getting bogged down in what oftentimes happens, which is the sort of group selection versus kin selection debate. So we might get into that a little bit. We might try to avoid it. Maybe I'll just say a couple of quick comments about it. Boyd and Richardson argued that the unit of selection can't be just the gene. We obviously know that it's also the organism, but also can it be larger groups? And no biologists basically have no problem thinking of a kin group or a blood group, a family, as being a kind of target for selection, because there you've got a real genetic connection between the different individuals. But a lot of biologists, starting with the neo-Darwinian revolution in the 40s and up into the 50s, thought that that a group was simply an assemblage of diverse individuals, and that selection couldn't work on it in the same way as the kind of unified, even extended organism of a family. So that was one of the major objections. And also the second sort of big objection to group selection was that the fear of the neo-Darwinians was that if you introduced things like selfishness in a group setting that wasn't family related, that selfish free riders would swamp out any of the cooperative altruists. And as a result, the Darwinian logic would lead to a kind of Hobbesian, all war of all against all, and you wouldn't get effective groups at all. So this was another sort of objection to group selection. So let's bracket that in a sense and get back to what we're more interested in, which is can there be sort of emotional cultures that are selected for or against? Can you have a more successful group, and what would it take, and how would it work? And the basic interest of Boyd and Richardson has been, well, the game changer is the development of altruism, where individuals will sacrifice themselves for others, And the question is, how did that evolve? Where did it come from? And their thesis in the paper that you and I read recently, which is called the Evolution of Subjective Commitment to Groups, a Tribal Instincts Hypothesis, their claim
2001.
is, yeah, that's 2001. So this is not their last word on it by any means. And they may have refined some of this, right? But if I read this right, their claim is that the original sort of orientation of the organism is going to be kind of individual, selfish, out for yourself no matter what. And but to scale up to large scale societies like nation states or just cities even, you need to have people that are willing to make cooperative sacrifices for non-blood colleagues or other citizens. And they think then you need, between that lower level of evolution and this top level of sort of nationalism, you need this middle level, which they're claiming is the evolution of tribal instincts. And that's the thing that they think makes the human primate so much more successful than other primates.
Yeah, and sort of taking a little philosophy of science approach to this, deciding upon the level at which to look at human culture and the human success story has been quite varied. If we think about Dawkins in the 70s, it's the gene, the selfish gene. Then you had these ideas of the individual, and I think it's a very positive movement towards thinking about, well, what's this crazy thing called culture? Maybe it's not just a spandrel or some sort of byproduct of our other physical behaviors and these other kinds of things. And that's what I think this is the context for their work and a lot of the interesting new work trying to figure out the efficacy of culture.
Yeah.
That is, it can make us do things. And this is, the bigger question of like, how does ideology create behaviors? How do living arrangements, what is domesticity and how does it channel our emotions and our behaviors? Different sizes, regional versus nation state versus hamlet. How are those living arrangements then molding all subsequent behavior and emotional life? That's sort of the bigger picture that I think is the right direction in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. And there's still some residue from the neo-Darwinians of the middle of the 20th century who think, well, the only way this is going to be interesting is if you can get these cultural levels, like you said, back into the genome somehow. And you see even Boyd and Richardson sort of like wringing their hands, about this. Like how does it get back into the genome? The example they like is, that drinking milk in Western culture, Western adults continue to produce lactase, which breaks down the milk, whereas in Eastern cultures they don't. And so this is an example of how the culture of milk drinking has changed selection at the genetic level. But I don't even think they need to worry about that, or we need to worry about that, because it's pretty clear that once you've got some very robust and stable cultural replication, it doesn't need to work its way back into the genome for it to be a powerful game changer in terms of adaptation. Like we don't know how to build fires genetically, and yet we transmit that information culturally, and it's a very robust cultural transmission, such that for hundreds of thousands of years, humans have been building fires, and it has allowed them, heat and to be able to cook food, like Richard Wrangham argues, the cooked food has a huge influence on the development of the human being, including, he thinks, the brain. But my feeling is once you have cultural evolution in place, and again, it has to be robust. It can't be something that only a few people know, and then if they die, it disappears. It seems to me that you've got parallel or co-evolution then, where you've got genetic evolution and cultural evolution riding sort of in tandem or one on top of the other, and that's fine.
Well, that's a very positive view. I guess I'll take a more pessimist view, is that we're living under this illusion about the robustness of cultural evolution. because we have the written word, because we have the internet, this electronic
That's
word.
true.
We have these things. We have recordings. We can record time. We can record all these things. It's quite recent, as you know, these technologies. The printing press, of course, is just still 400 years. It's not like
Yeah, that's true.
and so we've had a very substantive, robust way of passing things on. But uh, I think that we can very easily take culture for granted too, and that's why this work is interesting, because we're saying, wait, all this stuff is culture. That makes that it's a little scary, because it is on the knife edge. Because, like you're saying, cultures don't have to work their way to a genome. In fact, cultures are quite fragile, and they might only last one generation.
That's a good point. Yeah,
I mean,
you're convinced you made it to return to pessimism.
I'm reading Schopenhauer, and all I can think about is like, how's the worst way to look at this?
Yeah, I mean, you make a very good point when you talked about the, how recent the printing press is. And also, like, I was asking my students the other day, and they're typical college students, and none of them read books. Like, reading books is actually like slipping away. It's just it's the dying of the light, and there it goes. And of course, they're reading, but it's all online,
Mm-hmm.
But that is a good point. And apparently, it does look like, if you look through the fossil record or paleontological record, that fire does seem to come and go. Like,
Yeah.
we have it for thousands
Even
of years.
fire.
And then it disappears again, and then it resurfaces, and we have it. So, yeah, maybe I want to just walk back a little of my optimism about cultural evolution. But I do think there must be sort of behaviors like altruism that could be sustained in large part through cultural mechanisms like storytelling, literature, art, mimicry, religion, and could in fact have a huge influence on the ability of a group to cooperate. And that would be a modulation of their aggressive tendencies by cultural mechanisms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the discussion of altruism kind of turns me off, because it's always this idea of like, why would anyone do anything for some other person? And there's all these kin models for things. There's also the situation where we live in, where it is largely peaceful, for example. So those conditions, altruism makes sense. I mean, it's not sort of an anomaly.
Yeah.
I think once you start doing those tit for tat and those game theory things, and the prisoner's dilemma, then you're like, why would anyone be altruistic? And they get into these, to me, these bizarre thought, what are they called? Thought experiments.
Yeah.
Thought experiments. There's something about altruism that maybe I mean, sure, once you put in different conditions, altruism becomes an anomaly. But I think there's a large range of conditions where it's not.
Yeah, can I speak to that for a second? Because I think that's right. That's what is bothering me about the Richardson Boyd argument, and they're sort of the soft version of this. I think
There's a way hardcore.
There's a way more hardcore version. Yeah, and their claim is that they're mystified by altruism because they've set up the problem by assuming that the original or default operating system for the human being is pure egoistic selfishness, which is, sort of the model of the rational decision maker. But my argument in my book on, which was called Against Fairness, which came out, 4 or 5 years ago now, I was trying to argue, and here I'm following Darwin, Franz de Waal, Panksepp, that altruism is not this weird thing that has to develop out of selfish drive. It's simply the extension of the bonding experience that mammals have with kin or with family members. So you have very strong devotional feelings towards your children, towards your parents, toward your siblings. that doesn't come from left field. That doesn't emerge miraculously at some point when you get a higher level cognition. That's part of the basic operating system of being a mammal. And so I don't think our original position is egoistic selfishness. I think the original position is actually that altruism is built in at the family level and does not require some special explanation. What is required is means by which to stretch those instincts, like the care system, to larger and larger frameworks.
Yeah, if I could add something to that, I think also one of the assumptions of these models is a sort of atomized individualism,
Right.
where, yeah, you're an individual, and then let's start from you, and your genes want to get, spread. But I do think, and I've talked about this in some pieces, that individualism is a cultural thing we have in particular countries right now. It's not there's all these collectivists. There's billions of people living on the planet right now who are not even primarily individualists. And we take this individualism that comes from the political philosophy, Locke, etc., and we take it as a given, and we added it to neo-Darwinism, and then we had all these issues that arose. And like you're saying, there's mammalian reasons sort of to think that altruism and sharing the bond is there. And then I think there's a lot of cultural evidence that you're going to have familiarity with individuals who live around you, especially if you have a sedentary lifestyle.
Right.
Everyone around you is going to be part of the shared space, shared living space, and that creates bonds, and that creates responsibilities to other people and duties upon you. And we can't. I mean, we're now in this another illusion we're under, is that because we have access to all these things on our machines, and we can have this sort of life where you're in the pleasure dome of everything you want to hear, anything you want to see, whoever you want to talk to, it's all this instantaneous, this illusion. But that is something that had to be built into, that was built up by these Silicon Valley guys, and that's sort of it's an illusion.
The pleasure dome.
The pleasure dome, But you got to think about what did it take for the last 250,000 years to get to here? It wasn't guys in pleasure domes with the earplugs walking in, ignoring everyone around them. That would have been completely impossible.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it like two streams of thought occur to me. One is that this is one of the things that feminist philosophers, I think, rightly objected to, which is that men, sort of at the end of this Enlightenment project in the West, and the Romantic project, and the whole last 300 years, see themselves alone on the cliffside, basically like using science to dominate nature, and it's the apotheosis of rationality and will and the individual. And women are like, that could only come from a guy, because women are mothers and sort of instinctual caregivers, and always see their identity in a sense connected to others, particularly their children, but that's just the paragon case. And they tend to have a picture of the individual that's deeply rooted in a community first. So if you look at the kind of, this was part of developing an ethics that was based not on utilitarian logic or on the autonomy of the individual in the Kantian sense, but rather on notions like care and group dynamics. This was, so that's one thing. And then sort of related to that, I'm thinking about Steven Pinker's new book and the sort of new wave of sort of individualism is claiming, well, that's one of the great cultural sort of adaptive traits. Just like an animal might have a phenotypic trait that then selection can select for or against in an environment, the argument, the pro-Enlightenment argument is, developing the individual and rights and rationality is what has made Western culture so much more successful than any of its competitors. So that's kind of taking the cultural evolution position seriously, and also sort of talking about in very short-term time frames. It's not like thousands of years, it's hundreds of years. I'm wondering, what do you make of that?
Well, on the one hand, I do think that this version of culture that the West has needs to be articulated. And, I mean, Pinker's trying to do that in his book. But there's another book that I think does it better, Roberto Colasso's new book, that I don't think it's in English yet. But in that one, he tries to say secular humanism is a model. It is a faith. It is a model, and we need to articulate that. And I think the reason Pinker is doing things like that is that there's a need to say, well, what is being protected from these outlaws, these international outlaws? What is it that we're trying to protect? What is it that we have here? So I think that that's an important intellectual job. Someone's got to do that. Now, is someone going to be capable of encapsulating all of these things? I think that's going to be a little bit tougher, because there's an individualism that bristles in this whole secular humanism thing. Namely that, oh, well, you don't know exactly what I'm saying. And I mean, it even strikes me when you're talking about women as caregivers.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm going to get some flack for that. Yeah.
And the question is that, like we're talking about, how short is culture?
Mm-hmm.
How short is it? Right now let's talk about the 50s and the 40s and this sort of Freudian model of the woman as the homme manqué. Remember that?
Mm.
And then that set up, Steinem and that kind of, and Friedan and all that kind of stuff, and that rejection of that. And then there's a different model now about gender and what is a woman and what can a woman do and what is a man, all these kinds of things. That's the culture now. And that's having a real effect on behavior patterns and thought patterns and ideology and all these things. And I think it really makes clear this point that this whole cultural evolution study is doing, which is, look how effective culture is, even if it's one idea by one person. I mean, you think about these recent outlaw killers, these solitary men, all these things. There's some message that they're seeing in the culture that they're then taking and using to guide their behaviors. So I think culture is extremely powerful.
Yeah, I was going to say just that example is interesting. The lone shooter culture, there's now a culture of it, which, there wasn't before. Yeah, because in a sense, the internet spreads the imagery. You get the shooter's blog, you get his Facebook posts, you get why was he angry. Then you get a bunch of young men calling themselves incels, which means like involuntary celibates. They're angry that they're not getting sex and they're not getting intimacy with women. So there's a kind of, and some of these shooters have even sort of used that language to describe why they're taking revenge against the more quote unquote successful kids. And the internet has created an incredibly rapid horizontal transmission, like you're saying. It's not the vertical transmission of like grandparent to child to grandchild. It's more like it's immediately available all the way across the planet. And that's a very interesting issue. All this raises the question that, that the California school here, and I mean Boyd, Richardson, and Henrik, are interested in, which is how much of this is conscious and how much of this is unconscious. Because one of the cool things about this work is Henrik says, look, a lot of these really culturally successful adaptations are not in the conscious mind of the person in the culture. And his great example is, you remember this case where these guys, they're Westerners, they're in the middle of the outback in Australia trying to survive in the 19th century.
Oh yeah.
Remember this? And the local
Yeah.
people have got these like cultural life ways that include how to detoxify certain kinds of plants so you can eat them.
Hmm.
These Western guys don't learn it. They don't know it. They eat the plants. They die fairly quickly because they didn't have the cultural technology. But if you talk to the locals too, I think Henrik's point is they don't know what they're doing either. They're simply replicating behaviors through imitation. And it turns out that evolution just selects the good stuff and eliminates the bad stuff. But in the end, the group does not have conscious understanding of what it's doing. And that's really interesting too, because it makes me wonder about what's more successful, rational and conscious cultural changes, or these sort of unconscious imitation forms of learning. And that's still very important in our culture today.
Well, I wonder how much they're overlapping too. Like, let's take the example of, for example, some finding comes out through a university. You know, some chemistry lab says, okay, this is the strain of this thing, so here's an antidote. And then it goes to the CDC or whatever, the health people, and the government says, okay, an edict, everyone has to take this drug. So in that way, then everyone's got to take the drug, and everyone it has to go through the situation of taking the drug. Then you have a sort of top-down, rational thing like, this is our culture. Our culture now is you take this drug or wear the mask.
Yeah.
The study says you have to wear the mask. Like when you're in Beijing, you have to wear the mask. So that's the culture. It's a rational consideration. Here, what we know, and here's what we have to do. But then, as that's coming rationally and consciously, there's other unconscious spandrels, byproducts of that new behavior. There can be plays on it. Culture is playful too, and imaginative, as you've written about. There is that thing that's also going to start happening to the rational considerations that might become unconscious. There's the imitation, and then there's the play. There's the satire. That's part of imitation. Is the as you know, when we play music, we play a lick like, oh, that's a John Lee Hooker lick. Then you change it a little bit, Yeah. That's part of the imitation.
It's the variation, of the replication process. Yeah.
Yeah, the rational. Oh yeah, I learned a John Lee Hooker lick. Here it is. But then and it's also the way you play it and the context you play. There's all these conscious and unconscious things that make something clever too. So I'm just trying to bring those two in and try to say, like, even if it's rationally considered, there's going to be a bunch of unforeseen consequences that are unconscious.
Good. That makes sense to me too. It doesn't have to be either or, and I think that's right. Some cultural folkways derive from some original conscious problem solving, and then they just get replicated by imitation. I mean, a few of the things that Henrik says, he's got this new book out that I've been looking at. It's called The Secret of Our Success. And he said, and this sort of makes sense a little bit out of our contemporary culture. He says there are these specific cues that imitators like us use. So, for example, some of them seem very rational, like imitate the successful person. If that person comes home from the hunt and they've got like a deer over their shoulder, then imitate them because they clearly have some ability to mine resources out of the environment. So imitating them would be both logical and just good, productive, adaptive. But also he says we imitate people for if they're just older. Age matters to us. So you tend to imitate older people, and the expectation is maybe that they have wisdom in them and therefore they may know more. But you also imitate people who have prestige. So we imitate celebrities. And now I'm sort of fast forwarding to contemporary life. But I think this was true in the ancient world too. People who were charismatic or who were celebrities were people who you wanted to be like. So you had a kind of emotional connection to them. and then you had a way of imitating them. And so you see this is how our world is. I mean, there's a kind of cult of personality around Kim Kardashian. There's a cult of personality around Trump. And one of the things that's interesting about Trump and these celebrities is that they're not, if you look at, as we have this conversation, Trump is just having conversations with Kim Jong-un. And a lot of people think that he has a kind of, he has poor cognitive sort of approaches to problems. He doesn't seem to study for them. He doesn't learn what's needed. He doesn't then move through logically and draw inferences. He's more like a gut instinct guy. Like he sees you, he meets you, he has this kind of social or emotional intelligence response, and he's either going to push you because he thinks you're weak, or he's going to try to work with you, or he's going to be subordinate to you. It's really a whole way of operating socially that's emotional and at this gut instinct level, and it's not really rationality. And yet, this way of operating in the world can actually be extremely successful. I think that's, one example is I think that's why, other quote unquote, to use the sort of anthropology terminology here of the big man, the sort of chief who's just sort of has a lot of prestige, is vaguely frightening. The big men sort of respond to each other at this emotional level, and you get respect just because the other guy just seems vaguely dangerous or something.
Yeah, there is that. That's kind of the bully, bully dominant alpha male bully. But there's also this other thing that you bring up that's a little interesting is the charisma. What is charisma? Because you have prestige cultures, you have people who are on the top because they're the pugilists. That's the bully.
The fighters,
and then you have the charisma, and that's the kind of interesting one because you can kind of see it very clearly, especially with entertainers. Do they have it? And there's all these. There's this whole television takeover in the last 10 years of these shows. They bring on all these fools who wait in line and they think they have it. And then
the singing competitions,
the
talent competitions,
And they have these laughable people who are self-deluded, and then they have the people, that person really has it. Mm-hmm. And they put the machine to work on them and to strip them of all their dignity and what the machine does to people. But that whole thing is, what is it, and what would make people listen to you or look at you, regardless of what you're doing? Yeah, which is what the celebrity machine is. How can you get people to be interested in someone and just buy and watch, even if the person is doing nothing? Like these pseudo celebrities, you mentioned one of them earlier, and there are several other of these people. They can make people look at them for nothing. Yeah, I mean, maybe as you're talking here, I'm thinking maybe the point of all this is once you've fashioned some celebrity or prestige agent, that the point of it might be just so that many people can bond around that one individual. Like, we're all Elvis fans. We're all Britney Spears fans. Like, that's who we are as a group. And one of the functions of celebrity might be just that they form these hubs or nodes around which social groups or tribes can form. And in a sense, of course, if they have it, like you're saying, that would be the best. But the machine also can just manufacture whatever it is to make these tribes. And of course, the goal of these tribes is to buy stuff and to consume. And so this brings me to the other question I wanted to throw to you, which is one of the ways in which groups or tribes are formed is that they are formed because they share a common goal. They're all working together to maybe get to do the hunting or to do the foraging.
But also, it's pretty clear in terms of the development of our ancestors that we start to get symbols and emblems and ornamentation. And this is a way in which to form social groups too. And I know you've done work on this in terms of sort of contemporary consumer culture. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit too.
Yeah, I guess I can start back in the 50,000 years ago, where we have evidence of little, shells done as necklaces or sort of little symbolic accoutrements. And what we think that is differentiating within like intertribe communities. And there's someone called Wiesner. Wiesner wrote about this in sub-Saharan Africa. He did a long-term study over there, and they looked at these patterns of textile patterns, and each one of these tribes that lived very close to each other had little differences, and that's how you knew where that person was coming from. And this is more recent. This is in the last 100 years. But of course, we have this stuff from 50,000 years ago too, which all of this, there's a prestige thing going on. Of course, like if you have this kind of shell and you can only find this shell 350 miles away, then you have to have some sort of network that can connect you to the people over there, or you had gone there. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is something we're seeing in contemporary consumer society, which is, oh, have you traveled there?
Right.
Oh, yeah, I went there. Look at this is my shirt or my whatever that I got there, or my accent that I got there, or whatever. People are having all kinds of things they're bringing back.
Yeah, travel is a kind of prestige. Yeah.
Because you somehow went all the way to this other place. And so this is another kind of thing. These are all badges. We call them badges, really. So this is all sort of one thing. And then to sort of zero in on consumerism and contemporary culture, just because I wrote this book on this thing, there seems to have been it really seemed to gel well because of brands, the idea of the brand. Yeah. And then the brand, nowadays you have this more close connection with brands, and brands want to be interactive, and brands have twits now, and they have all these tweets.
Oh, tweets. Yeah. You're out of touch, man. Tweets.
Well, yes. I call them twits. I know it's called tweets. I call them tweets. But they have this whole connection now, right? You have Coca-Cola has a thing that it talks to you. So this is a new kind of brand thing. But all these things are still self-differentiating. Now interestingly, these corporate loci are starting to become more complex and more human-like, because they have these people, these interns or whatever they are, low-level people who are constantly responding and
interacting
on people interacting. Yeah. So it's starting to have this more of a community, the corporation as community, as interactive community. But what is going on, why they need to get rich thicker and thicker, these corporations, is because people need more from their brands. In a sort of anonymous world that we live in, these sort of urban anonymous worlds, we have this sort of individualist pleasure dome world. You still have to be able to differentiate yourself for your community. We see this in all kinds. We see it in this academic community. We see like the very fine refinements that, I'm really more in this school, or I like this person's early papers. Right. And we see with our students, we see they have very
with music and bands and stuff like this. Yeah, they're they're archivists, and
yeah, this kind of tattoo and that kind of tattoo. These things are all just small distinctions that you could only know if you're already inside that tribe. And so people are just talking to each other through their bodies. I think that's the function of all these things, including the clothes, and including, I think, tattoos and piercings are also continuous with this ethnic marker thing.
Okay, so that's helpful too, because we're trying to get a sense of ways in which groups coalesce at larger and larger levels. And what you're describing goes sort of from ornamentation to ultimately to corporate brands and the communities around those. And of course, you can see that religion is also another set of symbols and memes that bring people together. Like this group is Christian, this group is Muslim, and there are icons and symbols and texts that around which the group coalesces when they're not kin relations. So this then brings me to this other issue, which is there's this recent book by Amy Chua and her husband.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And Chua is famous for doing the battle cry of the Tiger Mother. She's Chinese American, and she wrote this bestseller sort of scolding American parents for being too easy on their kids and making them soft and fat and stupid. And but her and her husband, Rubenfeld, I think, wrote this book a couple of years ago. And I remember I reviewed it for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and it was a pretty divisive thesis, but I wonder if we could bring it in here and see what we think, because her claim was that different cultural groups have different belief systems and behavioral patterns, and that these can be more or less successful in an environment like the United States. And so her argument was, who are the groups, the immigrant groups, that have done very, very well in after they've come to the United States? Chinese have done extremely well in the United States. Jews have done extremely well in the United States. She claims these are her list. Lebanese Americans do phenomenally well, and her measures are, wealth, stable marriages, health, the basic metrics that you would use. Nigerians do phenomenally well, her claim is. Koreans, so she's got a list of ethnic groups that are doing great, and then some that are not doing so well. And their argument is that each of these cultures have three ingredients, and I may not remember the three exactly, or I might get it partly wrong, but one of the ingredients is that each of these groups is extremely good at impulse control. So Lebanese Americans, Nigerian Americans, Chinese Americans, they teach their kids pleasure is not going to be now, it'll be after your homework. It'll be later, like you must control yourself. And so there's this kind of cultural stress on impulse control. That's one ingredient. The other is, they said, all these groups, the members of these groups never feel like they're good enough. Psychologically and emotionally, they feel like their parents are not really quite proud of them, and that the parents are almost going to be proud of them. And then the third one is, paradoxically, given the second one, the third one I think is something like you feel very special as a group. Like Chinese Americans feel like we're Chinese Americans and we are maybe not better than everybody else, but a special group. We're Jewish, and that means something, as a kind of tribe. So she thinks these three ingredients make the group extremely successful in, a competitive capitalist system like the United States. So I'm just wondering what you think about that. They're kind of emotionally based, they're cognitively based, they're behavioral, and the claim is some cultures have them and others don't, largely via parental education. The parents stress this stuff.
Well, one thing is totally missing from our argument, which is that the question of what are these groups leaving? Do they have something to go back to? So, for example, the Lebanese community left a country that was torn apart by civil war. So there was different needs vis-a-vis assimilation. Chinese who were escaping depends when. Did they escape before 1977? Was it during Mao? Was it after Mao? Is it Deng? Is it this Xi? Which version of China are they escaping? Now they're not escaping. Now they're using their capital, for example. And the Jewish community has similar. It depends where they came from and the situation they're in. So that seems to be completely missing from the argument, which is, what does the community have a choice? And there's a range of within those communities.
But
There's people who go
just
back a lot.
I don't want to interrupt you, but just to throw in real quickly, that is very much like biological evolution. One niche becomes problematic, so you move to another niche. You know what I mean? I just want to add that.
Yeah, I think that's true. But the niche keeps changing. Like, for example, some of these groups return to the homeland. Some of them visit. Some of them have cut ties. And all that depends upon the community they're coming from and the sort of situation that each community, the situation they were in within that community. So I don't see any reflection of that in the gloss that you were giving. I'll also say that different countries have different expectations of the people who come there. So Canada will have a different expectation of its immigrants than America. Capitalism works differently in more socialist countries than other countries. So you have different expectations of success for the immigrant and for the host country. So I just want to add that to the discussion.
Yeah, good. That I think her analysis is too simplistic, and I think for the reasons you've suggested, and yet it does. I don't think there's nothing in it. I think there's something in it, which is if the organism is an amalgamation of traits that the environment can either support or select against, it seems to me that the cultural body is not that much different. But I agree. There's lots of caveats we could argue here, and there's a lot more complexity involved. Because for one thing, there's that question about what's conscious and what isn't. What are the expectations of the organisms in the new niche? What are the biases and forms of racism or ethnic prejudice? All that stuff is relevant here.
Right, and the fast-paced change of culture. So, for example, you have in many countries around the world now you have civil wars or sort of domestic strife. Venezuela, for example. Yeah. So now that's the culture of Venezuelans in this period, and so they're being shaped by it, and they're going to go out, and it has real consequences for how they live their subsequent lives. All of these things that seem like, oh, it's just culture, it's just something brief historical things. That's what's really the major factor in each individual organism's life, because of the time scale of culture is so much shorter than the time scale of genetic evolution. Yeah. Unless if a catastrophe happens, let's say there's some sort of ozone, whatever, then there is going to be some the genetic mutations will become again the most important factor, because there aren't, unless there's culture of creating technological feats to that will be limited, of course, to deal with the catastrophe.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Your comments remind me of how relative a successful trait is, because one of the ways that we tell the evolutionary story is that it's a story of increasing docility or domestication, where males, just to pick one example, males are less aggressive, and fathers are activated in the life of their children in a way that our primate history may not have had. And so there's a sort of selective pressure for less and less aggression. Mm. But on the other hand, if you go to war, aggression is exactly what you need. It's what you want. And so there's a sense in which these quick changes, like you said, between what's happening in your society, maybe, if you're living in a peaceful culture and, the very next year you find yourself in a civil war, then new emotional equipment is going to be needed to meet the threats. So It's not like aggression is intrinsically bad and has to be weeded out. It has to be managed by the culture such that it's not going in on itself, but it's also available to go outward at enemies when needed. So, all right, anyway, maybe we should sort of move to this next, sort of our last part of our conversation, because I think we've been at it for a while.
Oh yeah, this is something I wanted to ask you about. We've been talking about. You've had a big week. You've just
Yeah, I did.
right. So your book came out, Why We Need Religion, on Oxford. Came out this week, and you did a piece on New York Times.
Yeah.
You did a piece on LA Times.
Yep.
And you have another one coming up.
The
Hopefully.
Atlantic. There's going to be
Atlantic.
an excerpt in the Atlantic. Yeah.
So you've had a really big week
Yeah.
putting these ideas out. I've had a chance to read some of this book, and I think it's very exciting view on religion. Very, very different. It's a new thing. So I wonder, rather than saying what your views are in this book, because you've done that with all these other things, I wonder if there have been some sort of stinging criticisms, or if there's someone you want to punch back at, or sort of,
yeah,
the
sort of flame war of some kind.
I don't know if there's something that has made you think more deeply about the issues. It has something, because we write, we make music, we put things out into the world, and then things come back at us. A lot of times they're not substantive, but sometimes they are, and I wonder if substantive has come back at you that you want to reflect on. Yeah, no,
it has been a crazy week. I wrote sort of a short. It's not like a summary, but it's sort of part of my argument for the New York Times last week. And when it came out on a Monday, it got like 1,200 comments, like in the first day, and then they had to shut down the comment section apparently because they were just overwhelmed. And it tells you that religion is still a hot topic, very hot topic. And I would say but it did make me think a lot about these cultural groups that we've been talking about even in this conversation, because I got sort of four kinds of responses. I couldn't even look at the comments for a while. Even my editor was just like, I'm afraid to look, because people do this kind of, you'll click and write on something you love, but more often you click and write on stuff you hate clicking, Right. And so sure enough, there was, I'd say 1/4 of the comments I got, and I got a ton of email too, just independent of this article. My inbox has been filling up every day for the past week. And I'd say 1/4 of the people really just are lunatics. And I say that quite literally, like they've taken the time to write to me and tell me that they are the last incarnation of the Buddha and also a descendant of the King of David, and that aliens have, served them pancakes in their backyard. And so all like really lunatic fringe stuff. So not very interesting. But then there's a group of, I would say, atheists and agnostics, scientism sort of proponents, who must have just seen the title and just thought, this guy is our enemy. And so I received some vitriolic, like bordering on, physical harm sort of threats about how evil and stupid I must be to suggest that, religion has good things about it. And what was shocking about them was they seemed to be engaging primarily in the kind of virtue signaling that we were just talking about. They were trying to demonstrate to their own tribe how rational they were, how science devoted they were, and I was the whipping boy for that. And that if you actually read my article and looked at it, you'll see that I am not like religion rah. I'm not pro-religion, anti-science. I've written 10 books. All of them are pro-science. I believe in science. It is the most accurate way to understand nature. Nobody even could see that from this tribe. They were just like, this guy it was like I had, it was like they were the Inquisition, and that I needed to go on the rack. It was really strange. And you'll see me get a tongue lashing on all these blogs of sort of the new atheist. Then there was a group of people who were very pleased because they thought I was just obviously a religious person like them. And that's also not true. They also didn't really read the piece, but they thought he's on our side. So they rallied around And then finally, there was a group that seemed to have read it, seemed to have seen that it's kind of a new argument, and then wanted to interact with it. And they sort of were recommending things or pointing out problems with it. And that was a really wonderful exchange. But my point is that the actual interaction I had was so disconnected with the claims I was making.
Mm-hmm.
It was really more like how I was perceived, and then these kind of knee-jerk responses that were more about this group tribal solidarity rather than what I was saying. And so that was kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, this is kind of goes back to the point we were making earlier about Pinker and this idea that they're trying to say this is secular humanism. But once you get into the public sphere, so basically that article was in the public sphere.
Yeah.
You start to see that the cultural differences are pretty large.
Yeah.
And secondly, one thing that seems to be showing about mass public spheres is that they are largely incoherent. They're not cohering around that content seems to have less of a is not the dominant element.
I think that's right. And that, I think, goes back to these other cues, prestige, charisma, celebrity. You know, at least I'm not that, you know. And I think that this is partly, and what's sort of amusing about this is most other people, the irony is not as strong, because I think most people feel fairly comfortable thinking that their group solidarity is based on things like emotions and how they feel about the person or the book or the song or the band. But the group where the irony is strongest is the hyper-rationalists, the Pinkers of the world, the Sam Harrises of the world, their various minions. They see themselves as having nothing but rational allegiance to true ideas. And the idea that they could somehow be a tribe that was identifying with each other through emotional means, basically, we're not the dupes. We're the tribe of non-boobs. That's basically their tribe. They utterly reject that. They don't see that. They think that's for the dummies. We're only chasing the truth. But in point of fact, these guys don't know that much science themselves. They just like it as a worldview, and they like it as a community.
Well, I mean, that's why I'm interested in if someone's going to be able to articulate what is secular humanism.
You've read that Charles Taylor stuff. It's pretty good on this, right?
Oh yeah. You're talking about the secular age?
Yeah, and also like that book on the self gets into it too.
That's a great book. Yeah. And like I said, this Colosso one is very interesting because Colosso is saying it's a type of faith, not the altar of science, but a type of a set of structures, a set of rituals, basically. There's a set of rituals that a scientific conference is, or medicine, drugs. You know, these are all rituals too.
Yeah, I think that is, when you start to point that out, the science fan feels like you're critiquing the actual scientific method, and that's not what you're doing. That's not what I'm doing. We're simply pointing out that there is a culture of science, and that it's relevant in terms, not maybe in terms of the logic of justification for a theory, but it's certainly relevant in terms of the logic of discovery, and it's certainly relevant in terms of the logic of cultural transmission. What ideas become hip and trendy has to do with the culture of science, not just the facts of science. And some ideas simply cease to be popular. They're not refuted. They just are no longer popular.
That's right.
And that's something that is really part of this larger discussion of cultural evolution that we've been having. So I think we've been at it now for over an hour. Maybe we should take a break. But it's been fun as usual.
Yeah.
And
thank you, Steve.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you. Let's let people know that we've got a whole series of these. We must be up to 7 now. I think we've done this 7 or 8 times. I'm not sure. But we're going to keep them coming, and also it's good to sort of point people to the some of the stuff we've been talking about. We'll try to put that in the some links in the links section. So, all right, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Rami, and we'll see you next time.